Well, welcome to the Esports Performance Summit. My name is Brian Bain, and with us today is Taylor Johnson. Taylor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, hey, Taylor, do you mind kicking us off with a little bit of background on yourself and kind of how you got involved in esports and what you're doing in esports right now?
Sure, love to. So my background is in athletic performance. I coached in college and the NFL for about 10 years. Majority of my time was spent coaching in college, and I was fortunate to coach some great programs in the Pac-12 and SEC. And then that actually led me back to California, where I ended up working for the San Francisco 49ers for 2 years and overseeing the sports science, nutrition, and player development. And it was during that time, I've always told people that my passion is performance and it's my curiosity that navigates me through the world. And it was during that time before, I was like, hey, this is great, but it's not the end all be all for me. And I became intensely curious about esports. I was reaching out to friends and colleagues and looking for areas to pivot. And when I came across esports, I had known of it, but I hadn't realized how big it had gotten. And diving into it more, I was just blown away by the cognitive output and the level of strategy and thought that is put into these games and the execution. And then realized very quickly that there's way more similarities than differences when you look at traditional sports and esports. And about 2.5 years ago, I made the pivot full on, and I haven't looked back since.
Well, and leading up to the interview, we talked about some current projects you're working on, and specifically related around neurosciences and how that affects the gamer. And I'd love to hear kind of what you're doing there and how that can benefit all of our viewers.
Yeah, love to. So one of the big projects I'm working on now is I joined Statespace, which is a neuroscience and AI company who developed a first-person shooter training game called AimLab. And the goal and the objective behind building out AimLab is to have it be an entirely customized user experience that really enhances in-game performance without playing the specific game itself. And so what we realize is there are some categories to really target and go after, which is speed, precision, accuracy, reaction time, as it relates to in-game performance. And so our CEO, who developed about 95% of the game himself while he was doing his PhD at NYU for neuroscience, built out this amazing platform where we're taking a lot of the same tools and performance assessments that you'd find in a neuroscience lab and built them into the game. And so not only, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so not only are we just looking at did you hit the target, yes or no, but we're also looking at how did you miss the target, in terms of with your accuracy, how close to the target is your movement? Did you hit it dead center? Did you go past it? And then part of the neuroscience process is looking at the connection between your reaction, your processing, also with your field of vision, where are your eyes going and how is the cursor moving to that target and clicking. So it's been a really fun project, just diving into the neuroscience and looking at what we currently know about neuroscience and visual performance, and then embedding that within the game itself, as well as conducting research outside of what we know to be true, and really seeking some answers to better enhance in-game performance.
So is this game, AimLab, is it more of an actual endpoint game itself, or more like kind of a trainer that someone would access and use as they're getting ready to perform at a different game?
Yeah, so it'd be the latter. So it's an agnostic first-person shooter training platform that could be used with any of your favorite games. So it's a standalone game itself. So it's free on Steam right now. It's called AimLab. So our free beta is out there. And essentially, we have pro players, amateur players, content creators use it as either a warm-up or kind of an in-between kind of game reset. And it's a phenomenal way to enhance all of your in-game performance while not having to play a game itself. And looking at traditional sports and kind of working backwards from game day, sometimes it's best to kind of remove yourself from the game and just focus on specific categories or aspects of the game and then kind of work that back in.
So I'm trying to imagine, so I guess as you're playing the game and you want to become better as a first-person shooter and you're taking shots and stuff, I guess, is it giving you like real-time data in terms of your accuracy and, where your eyes are focusing? Like, what all is going on there that helps make it such a great trainer? I'm curious.
Yeah. So the first part is it's broken down into different categories that look at kind of those four big buckets that we were exploring. So the speed, precision, or accuracy, and reaction time. What we have along with that is an AI component. So this artificial intelligence coaching mechanism basically looks at your performance in a specific task and then builds out your next training experience based upon that previous game. So for instance, Brian, let's say that you're playing the game and we notice that your accuracy is really deficient in the upper and lower left quadrant of your field of vision. So what happens is that AI track, when you start to play it, it'll start to populate targets in that left field of vision in the upper and lower quadrant without you even knowing it. And that's only when you play a specific track. You could play a standalone game by itself and you could just play and it'll give you direct feedback and kind of show you where you're deficient. But when you actually go into the AI track, it starts to curate your entire experience based upon previous games. And we're going to start to loop in kind of direct game data as well.
Interesting. So I guess you can go on, you can say, hey, I want to get better with my speed today, and just pick a track, and it'll walk you through that, and then keep tailoring the next games you go through based upon your existing performance and where you're wanting to grow and where you're deficient, and then it keeps kind of evolving around with your current skill set.
Correct.
Interesting. What does, as far as the neuroscience piece, I guess obviously there's neuroscience built into the game in terms of how people are thinking and stuff. I'd love to hear more about that side of it in terms of how that's impacting gamers and helping them in their performance level.
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, there's just not a lot of science out there as it relates to gamers. So that's a big emphasis for us is to, we have 3 PhDs from NYU that are part of this project and this company. And our chief science officer is a member of the National Academy of Science and very, very well-respected neuroscientist in the field. And what we really want to explore is, okay, what do we currently know about the neuroscience as it relates to performance in general? And then how can we start to target specific tasks in game and start to study that? Because the other part is, what we have is a analytics platform. So we're basically pulling all that data and saying, okay, we're starting to track, acute and chronic loading over time and say, okay, well, how are changes in gameplay? What's actually happening? So related to the future of the neuroscience and what will come is a couple of research projects with NYU and other teams and players to really start to drill down and explore like what is actually happening and what can we provide as a tool and a resource to enhance that gaming performance, as well as start to think about everything on the peripheral that then feeds into that in-game performance.
And is the work you're doing at Statespace, does all that feed into AIMLab specifically, or is AIMLab just the current product out there and kind of the first step toward a much bigger training?
Yeah, AIMLab is the first step towards a much larger project. So that is kind of the beta version of us figuring out as we go, right? I think that was a big part of us making it free in the beta. It's like we want feedback. We're constantly putting out patches every week and changing the user experience based upon the feedback that we get, which is phenomenal. Right? We're essentially learning on the fly with them, and we know what science sticks as we know of it right now. And then that also kind of leads us in other directions. So a lot of the education and stuff that I'm building out is more geared on the peripheral support. So it's everything around lifestyle, mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery, and how can we start to develop and embed that within the game itself to offer a very comprehensive tool for training.
Well, I love that. And let's maybe shift over to that a little bit too, as far as like you mentioned the mindset and other components of gaming that help gamers play healthy, stay healthy, and also like really increase and improve their performance. I'd love to kind of maybe transition to that for a moment, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah. So the first one I'll start with is just general lifestyle. And so what I mean by that is looking at your day to day and saying, okay, well, what is the ideal lifestyle? And I think for a lot of gamers, at least in my experience in having conversations with amateur and pro players, is they tend to become very, very much engrossed with the game itself, which it isn't a bad thing. However, balance is necessary. And I think the conversation that continues to come up is this burnout. And it's a cognitive burnout, right? It's being in the thick of it day in and day out and playing 6 to 8 hours a day, most times more than that, because 6 to 8 hours is the scheduled block of training for these pro teams, and then players will play for another 4 hours after. So looking anywhere between 10 to 12 hours a day of playing, 6 days a week for very long seasons. So I think from a lifestyle component, it's really understanding how balance folds into it. And I'm sure other people have talked about sleep and nutrition and other aspects to kind of build out this supporting network to allow you to play the longest as possible. And I think taking a step back and looking, okay, well, what is the ideal lifestyle and how do I make time for the things that matter most to me? So making time is a huge one. So time management, stress management. So the stress management kind of comes in with the next pillar, which is the mindset. And it's getting the proper tools and proper resources in place to allow you to have those coping mechanisms when things get really tough. And I think what I've experienced in being in the space and kind of looking at the different levels of high school, college, and pro, and everything in between that, is there's not too much being done or being said around kind of the cognitive or the psychological support. And that conversation's happening more and more, which is great. And there's some phenomenal people in the space that are doing good work along that. But it's having the right coping mechanisms and having the right kind of support group. And I think a lot of that comes with communication. And it's very powerful to have a conversation with individuals and kind of clear the air. And I think a lot of the toxicity that comes is just a lack of communication or a lack of being able to convey the message from one person to the next. So that's very useful.
So as far as mindset goes, I'm curious as far as like tools and resources that, so you're talking about mindset in terms of just mental health. Are there other components as far as improving gameplay and things along those lines that you would like to elaborate on maybe a little bit?
Yeah, so mental health is a big one, but then also related towards the game itself. So having a proper briefing before a game, having a proper debrief is really important. And there are some teams that do this well. However, there's always room for improvement. So proper debrief, it could be as simple as what went well, what went wrong, what are some lessons learned, and what do we carry into the next game. And you'd be surprised how many pro players or players that are climbing the ranks don't take the time to do that. And so from a mindset standpoint of really setting your mind to the task at hand and really setting yourself up for success is being able to pause at the end of each game and reflect back on what happened and take those lessons learned and then carry them forward to the next game or subsequent days.
So you travel a lot. You've been around the space for a while, and at least in esports time. And you mentioned high school, college, pro. You see all these different levels, and I'm sure that you interact on others as well. I'd love to hear like your thoughts as far as the kind of the state of gaming right now, and kind of what you're seeing evolve on both the high school, college, and pro levels, and how people maybe in outside those spaces could be benefiting and learning from that. Because I think that it's easy for people to lose scope inside of what's actually going on out there. You hear about pro stuff a little bit, and maybe people have college teams but feel kind of disconnected around those, or high school teams, or they want to form teams. I'm really curious to hear you kind of just talk a little bit about what you're seeing happening in those spaces that can help our audience begin to kind of evolve into them better themselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So a lot more people are starting to realize the benefit of structure, systems, and scheduling. Those are kind of like the three big S's that really set the foundation for everything else to build off of. And so you're seeing it at the high school, college, and the pro level.
Again, could you give those three things again? Could you give those three again?
Yeah, so structure, systems, and scheduling.
Gotcha.
All right, so that's the foundation in which everything else can be built off of. And so what you're seeing across the board is a lot more structure being put in place. I think before it was this wild, wild west of everyone's just kind of running and gunning and trying to figure it out. However, now with more investment coming in and people being more methodical about how they're structuring the leagues and these tracks from one domain to the next. So high school to college, what does that look like? And then college to pro, what does that look like? And the education that goes along with that. And I think what you're finding is a lot more people are being more thoughtful on the overall structure and the resources. Then within that, it's okay, what are the systems? And so, I'm sure people talked about the sleep and recovery. Okay, so those types of tools and resources being systems, how does that plug into the overall structure? How is practice being set up from day to day? Are you doing the same thing back to back? Or are you giving some variation in practice so you don't have this fatigue or burnout? There's a lot more of that conversation happening, which I think is fantastic. And that's one of the big pushes that I'm trying to do is help educate, bringing over what I've seen in traditional sports, knowing that you can't fit a square peg in a round hole, and really kind of giving some useful tools on building out those structures, systems, and scheduling.
Right. What are you seeing? So we've got the pro leagues, which people are familiar with. How common are college teams now? Would you say most larger schools are developing their own teams? Are schools recognizing these teams? How does that space look as you've seen it?
Yeah, I believe that in the very near future, almost every major school will have an esports club team at the very least, if they don't already. Then you have scholarships. I don't know the exact number right now, but I think it's upwards of 20 schools, 20 colleges have college scholarships for esports. And so with that conversation, what's very interesting is, okay, how do you then recruit for those types of athletes or those types of gamers, knowing that there's an SAT score attached to that, knowing that there's a certain level of skill and competency attached to that. I think that's where you start to look at, okay, what needs to be true to develop a very well-rounded player to take you from high school to college and into the pros.
Right.
And so with that kind of ties back into those other pillars. I mean, you have, the lifestyle, the mindset, those are two, but then you have nutrition, movement, recovery. And that kind of fills in the gaps of, this in-game performance, the technical and tactical aspects of it, aside from just grinding and gaming. It's, okay, how do you fuel yourself both before game, during game, and after the game? How do you get proper recovery? Then how do you prevent injuries in the long term? And so those are kind of the big three supporting pillars on the peripheral that really help kind of create that entire experience. Because what I would hate to see is somebody who is a phenomenal player in high school get a scholarship for college and then get burnt out by the time they're done playing college and not even get a chance to play their pro career. And what can really help enhance performance and really extend their longevity is really taking care of the bodies. And kind of circling back to the project with Statespace, I mean, really what we want to do is educate. We want to build a phenomenal training platform as well as educate the users on how to take care of the body, how to enhance their mindset, how to eat proper nutrition and get proper recovery so that they could play the longest. There is no reason why a pro gamer can't play well until their 30s or 40s if they wanted to.
Right. No, yeah, I'm trying to piece all these things together. And so you talked about I'm piecing all the things different together here, as far as you mentioned, as far as the structure going through as far as high school, college, pro, and then all those levels are really they need more structure of those, but also the systems and the scheduling to help people just perform more healthy. And we talked a little bit about what the college scene looks like. And then, but really then you mentioned lifestyle, mindset, nutrition, and then you said mechanics. Is that the fourth one you mentioned?
Movement and recovery.
Movement and recovery. Yeah. Maybe let's focus on that a little bit more too, though, because I want, as far as movement and recovery and things people can be doing, because I'm trying to think through as far as takeaways for people. Because on one side, I think it's really valuable to have the big picture as far as what's going on. I know for me that's super helpful, and our listeners as well, just kind of see what's actually going on out there and where are the opportunities and where are the needs. But then also from day to day, how can gamers be getting better? Obviously, what State Street's doing through AIM Lab has got some really great stuff. You said that's freely available. But as far as maybe let's take a minute on movement and recovery. What do you mean by that? And what are some things people can take away from that?
Totally. So, everything I'm talking about, it's really how to enhance your cognitive performance for pro players, even those in college playing. I mean, it's about how do you enhance your cognitive output and sustain it day to day. And so when we look at nutrition and we look at movement and we look at recovery, it's what are the things we can do on a daily basis and have it be the minimum effective dosage, right? So what is the bare minimum that we can do day to day that can help push us towards a better level of mastery and performance? And so with movement, with increased blood flow and with an improved cardiovascular system, with as little as 10 to 20 minutes a day, you can really enhance your cognitive performance, right? So there's actually a lot of research out there that shows that, physical activity basically turns on these light switches in your brain, and one of them is like BDNF, right? So brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So with exercise, what you do is you're actually turning on these light switches in your brain, and it helps with visual spatial processing. It helps with memory. It helps with encoding all of these lessons that you take throughout the day and really internalize them. The other thing that you can do is, the cheapest thing is get more sleep, right? I will always push for people to aim to get more sleep on a daily basis, and know that, being smart with your caffeine consumption, because the more caffeine you consume on a daily basis, the more it's going to push you farther and farther away from really getting as much sleep as you need. And that's something to keep in mind. In terms of nutrition, it's really, it's some simple habits, right? It's habits that then turn into lifestyle changes. So it's getting, incorporating some more veggies day to day. It's eating lean proteins. It's eating healthy fats. It's understanding what smart carbohydrates are, and it's looking at some nutrient timing. And I'm sure people have talked about that, and the other speakers that you've had on that talked about nutrition. It's fairly straightforward. And with all this stuff, I would say, really it's start small. And my biggest advice to either pro gamers or aspiring pro gamers is know that you don't have to do everything all at once. It's about building habits and doing those habits very well that then turn into a lifestyle change. And this could be a performance lifestyle. And I talk about that quite a bit with the people whom I work with in teams and organizations, is start small. I call it BAMs. Like, what is the bare ass minimum that you can do on a daily basis that then turn into consecutive habits? And those habits will then turn into a lifestyle change. So don't try to do too much, too soon, too often, or all at once. Start with something small and master it. You don't get to be a pro overnight, right? It takes time.
No, that's really helpful. Because I think again, in this space, there's so many people, because of that lack of structure you mentioned, people don't really know, what does moving forward in the system look like, and how do I do that, and how do I get better? And one of the things we're talking about in the summit a lot is, in terms of overall improved performance as a gamer, what are the things that you can do today that can quickly differentiate yourself from the competition? And I think you mentioned a lot of those things specifically that may not sound like a big deal, like, oh, well, yeah, get more sleep. Okay, eat healthier. Yeah, I know that, but are you doing it? And again, one of the things I've said numerous times already in the summit is, when I was playing high school sports, the training room, they had this quote around the wall that said, champions do the little things that others don't want to do. And so we've repeated that numerous times at the summit, reminding our listeners that doing these seemingly small things, these BAMs, if you want to call them that, make a big difference. And I'm curious if there's when you survey the playing field out there, I'm sure, and you've already shared some of these things, but if there's anything else I want you to do that, what do you look out and see for gamers and think, man, if you would just do a couple of these things differently, you would automatically be in a different league from everyone else, just because no one else is willing to do that? I assume that's some of the things you've been sharing. I'm curious if there's anything else you would share along those lines.
Yeah, I'd probably just circle back on, some of the easiest things to do, no pun intended for it being low hanging fruit. Nutrition. Definitely focus on starting to change your nutritional habits and get more sleep. Start with that. Those are the first two things I always work with for individuals and teams when I start to consult and build out these programs. It's like, hey, let's take a look at what your nutrition is day to day, especially game day nutrition, super important. And then let's start to look at your recovery. And if your sleep schedule is super out of whack, let's kind of go to work on that, but start in 15-minute increments. I've talked to a lot of people and they're like, hey, go to bed earlier. Well, somebody's going to bed at 2 a.m. You're telling them to go to bed at 12 or telling them to go to bed at 10 p.m. That's a pretty drastic change. So, hey, rather than going to bed at 2 a.m., why don't you go to bed at 1:45? Let's start with that. Do that for a week. And if you can do that for a week, awesome. Now go to bed at 1:30. Because it's all about, again, creating those small little hurdles versus these giant leaps, right? It's just these small steps. That would be the first two things I always encourage people is really get your nutrition dialed in. And that could be as simple as just cutting out sodas or trying to reduce sugar. Because that way you're going to really help yourself in the long run for cognitive performance. You're not going to get any spikes and then crashes with the sugar, especially paired with caffeine.
Well, I think this is a good theme right here. I'd love to hear like more BAMs. You know, what are some more of those minimums? Like that's really helpful as far as like, you know, cutting out the soda, reducing sugar, 15 minutes sleep earlier each time. Again, that sounds like a small thing, but that is a normal thing that I've seen. Oh, I need to get 8 hours of sleep or 6 hours of sleep, whatever you need to do. And you think, oh, that's 2 hours more than I'm used to. That's a huge change, but 15 minutes is doable and gains momentum. That's great.
Totally. Yeah. So, okay. So we could do, let's make some BAMs. All right. So let's start with lifestyle balance. You know, take 30 minutes once a week to just kind of chill out and reset. Get away from social media, get away from the game. I mean, 30 minutes may not sound like a lot, but for a lot of people that are really in it on the gaming scene, like that could be a long time where they're not talking or thinking about it. So actually, this kind of ties into the mindset stuff too. It's
right.
Take some time to debrief and think about, okay, where have you been along this track? Where you are now, and where would you like to go? 30 minutes, once a week can kind of be a really big reset in your normal routine to kind of help you set yourself up for the next few steps. And kind of stemming off that, it's, create a roadmap for yourself. Once a quarter, how about that? Once a quarter, sit down and kind of write out, where am I? What have I done leading up to this point? What are some lessons learned? What do I want to do next? And then once you create that roadmap and say, okay, if I want to, go from college to pro, that's your objective. What's the distinction between outcomes and behaviors? So the outcome is I want to go pro. What behaviors do I need to do to have that be true? So I need to win X amount of games. I need to qualify for this. And you start to do that and you kind of create a 1 year, a 6 month, 3 month, 1 month, 1 week, 1 day roadmap. That's very helpful. So that's lifestyle mindset. For nutrition, it's easy one, or maybe not an easy one, but reduce the amount of processed sugar. So maybe that's drinking one less soda or one less energy drink, or maybe it's making a conscious effort to, rather than reducing anything, how about adding in? Maybe drink 1 more or 2 more glasses of water per day. So rather than adding an additional soda or energy drink, you add a glass of water instead. That tends to work pretty well for people. It's like, hey, don't worry about removing anything, but just try to drink more water. Let's just start with that. That tends to work pretty well. For movement, I have on my YouTube channel, I've got a whole bunch of videos. One of them is like a daily mobility. It takes 5 minutes. I literally myself, I do that every day. Like that is my BAM for movement some BAMs. Because I travel so much. Sometimes it's really hard to get in what I know I need to do. So if I could do this daily mobility, and sometimes I tack on some push-ups and some body weight squats, then that's a win for me. And that's as simple as just, literally just kind of rolling around on the ground, and I do some low back mobility and I do some activation stuff, and it takes 5 minutes. And that, for me, that's a win. I mean, I can give you a link for that video as well to share. For the recovery, it's really making a good effort to get more sleep. And if I can't get enough sleep, what I try to do is, squeeze in a 20-minute nap. And sometimes what I've found to be really helpful to kind of get you to that place where you get more restful sleep, and some of the viewers may kind of resonate with this, is I have a very active mind. And so at night, when I lay down to go to bed, I find that my mind is just racing. Like I think of like a conversation that then leads me to make like 4 different connection points, and then my mind's just going. So what I encourage people to do is do like a brain dump, where I literally take a piece of paper, I go on my computer, I just write out everything that's on my mind. That tends to help really well. And then
Awesome.
you're basically just trying to set yourself up. And something that helps too, kind of putting a bow on all that is, make the time to plan ahead. I think a lot of people tend to just kind of wing it, which is great, but sometimes it is very helpful. Again, going back to the structure, systems, and scheduling, to kind of plan ahead for the next day and say, okay, well, what's on tap? What can I do now? Or what can I set out or get done ahead of time that'll make this day easier?
Awesome. No, that's really helpful. Those are, I like the BAMs. That's good, very tangible, big next steps people can take and apply to different stages, regardless of where they are in their gaming competition. You know, one of the things we talked about before the interview too was there's a lot of people in this industry or wanting to get into the industry that may be gamers, but they also have another kind of professional expertise in terms of whether it be in health or otherwise, and they want to either get into coaching or training and working with esports athletes. That's a space you are in yourself, and you've been, you know, charting a lot of headway, making a lot of headway, charting new waters in that regard. I'd love to hear, as we get ready to sign off here in a minute, what are some advice and tips you'd give to people wanting to become professionals in the industry, besides being a gamer themselves?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, I mean, anybody who's interested in that track can reach out to me. I will always respond, even if it takes me a little while. I think one of the big things for me is mentorship. I've had some phenomenal mentors that have gotten me to where I am now, and it's kind of paying it forward and kind of closing the loop of this knowledge where you have your mentors, you have your peers who you talk with, and then you pass that knowledge on to those who are next in line. And I'm very, very passionate about that. You know, some of the advice I would give is, you know, it never hurts to ask. Like, it never hurts to ask. And I learned that when I started to pivot over into esports and just reach out to people, ask questions, get curious. So it never hurts to ask, but first and foremost, have the curiosity to kind of look and see what's been done, and more importantly, what hasn't been done. And one of my mentors, whom I still talk with a lot, one of the most profound things he ever said to me was, see what everybody else is doing and do the opposite. And I've based my entire career off of that. And it's
like
been,
going in the esports from in the NFL.
Oh yeah. I mean,
that's a pivot.
That was a big pivot. That was a very interesting one. And a lot of people thought I was crazy, but now everyone calls me and they're like, hey, so what are you doing?
Yeah.
You know, but again, that's part of the process, right? And it's, believe in yourself, and it never hurts to ask. You'd be surprised how many people are out there that are willing to help, but you have to ask for help. The other thing too is, read outside the scope of whatever profession you're in. So let's say you want to get into esports performance and you're really curious about, you know, how to optimize in-game performance. I actually have this conversation with a lot of coaches, you know, for Overwatch or for League of Legends. And they are so brilliant when it comes to in-game and technical, tactical, and mechanics and understanding game theory, that all the set pieces of what has to happen. And what I encourage them to do is look into other domains and other industries of where that same kind of mindset could be applied. And it's a two-way street. So could those tactics that you're using in game for Overwatch and how you're kind of set piece in those strategies, could those same principles be applied in business or in other areas of, you know, like engineering, right? Because everything's connected. And I think that was a huge realization for me, is realizing that everything is connected, and there are some governing dynamics and truths that are true across the board. And so just get super curious and see what other connections you can make, and then pull that into your current role.
I love that one. I'm a huge fan of interdisciplinary education and learning.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, that's how you continue to, you know, develop and evolve. And the other thing too is, especially when you're kind of getting into uncharted waters, is you can't have an ego, and you have to admit that you could be wrong. And I think it's kind of like this whole Steve Jobs thing, is like the best idea wins in the room. It's like, it doesn't matter, you know, kind of what background you have. It's like, if you have a great idea, first you need to voice it, but then, you know, don't be attached to it as well. And I think that kind of goes across the board of just really, really thinking and being curious and putting your ideas out there.
Nice. Taylor, this has been fantastic. And I'm curious, before we sign off here, any other advice that you have that jumps out to you? I mean, you've already shared a ton, either for gamers wanting to improve their performance or people wanting to become professionals in the space, that you haven't shared.
Yeah, small steps.
Hmm.
You know, it won't happen overnight. Take your time, do it right, and be a good person. Like, I think that's a huge one too. In any industry, in any career, you know, be a good person, reach out, ask questions. Don't be afraid of collaboration.
Awesome. Well, Taylor, thanks for being that person. I mean, you've been fantastic. Really appreciate you being a part of the summit. I know you're traveling all over the country and probably even beyond, working with people and teams and coaches and players, helping them becoming better esports athletes. And you're taking the time to be with us here in the summit and kind of paying back here. So thanks for that. Thanks for your help, and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you. Appreciate it.